Dear friends, it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who I've been following for some time through the wonderful books that have been written about an exercise, a classroom experiment that became a national movement. Jane Elliot, a wonderful, upstanding woman, human being from Riceville, Iowa. And we're going to open this evening with a short clip from the Oprah show to give us a little bit of perspective on that experiment that was first introduced to a classroom run and presided over by Jane. I will be sharing short clips, 2 or 3 more throughout the conversation. This is the first.
Separated into 2 groups. Not on the color of their skin were they separated when they arrived. They were separated based on the color of their eyes, but they have no idea that they were separated. What we did was treat each group differently, discriminating against the people who have blue eyes, catering to those people with brown eyes.
Come on. Look over your eyes. Over there. No. Over there. Over there.
The blue-eyed people were pulled out of line, told to put on a green collar and wait outside. When the brown-eyed people arrived, they were told to step to the front of the line. Audience members with brown eyes were allowed to enjoy coffee and donuts. The blue-eyed group became upset when they saw the brown-eyed people were being seated first. Diversity expert Jane Elliot helped set up the experiment.
I've been a teacher for 25 years in the public, private, and parochial schools in this country, and I have seen what brown-eyed people have done as compared to what blue-eyed people do. And it's perfectly obvious. And if I didn't believe it before this morning, you should have been here this morning when we brought these people in here.
Feeling discriminated against, the blue-eyed audience members were visibly upset.
She was rude to us, all of us. Yelled at us, called us names, pushed us aside. She was rude.
Just want to say, why doesn't Jane have a green collar? She's got blue eyes.
Because I've learned to act brown-eyed. I have a brown-eyed husband and 3 brown-eyed children.
Why did you?
And the message in this room is act brown-eyed and you too can take off your collar. Act intelligently and you too won't lose your collar. None of you have acted intelligently yet.
It wasn't long before the brown-eyed people bought into the idea that they were superior.
You people, it is. People, I had a girlfriend in school.
In school who was blue-eyed. She was so stupid. She was always copying off of my papers. These people were so rude and so noisy today, we couldn't hear any ourselves even talk.
Eventually, the audience figured out the show was really about race. Now, he was so angry, he took off his collar way on early.
How many of you people of color can take off the collar that we have put on you? How many of you can take off your color? But if a black male refused to follow your orders or your husband's orders or your father's orders on the street, you would not see that as being highly principled. You would see him as being an uppity nigger.
Well, we can see where this is going. She's saying that everybody has racism in them. It's not really about the eye. She's trying to teach about racism. But she can't get away from the fact that God created the races and you are going to be different. You can't help it.
God
to be like that.
One race, the human race, and human beings created racism.
We caught up with the mastermind behind the eye color test. Jane Elliot is her name, 22 years later.
I loved teaching. I started the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise because Martin Luther King Jr. had been one of our heroes of the month in February in my 3rd grade classroom, and he was dead at the hands of an assassin. I hate to talk about this because every time I talk about it, I remember how it felt that day. I was going to have to go into my classroom and explain to my students why the adults in this country had allowed somebody to kill hope, because Martin Luther King, for me, was hope for this country. I decided that the next day I was going to do what Hitler did. I was going to pick out a group of people on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they had no control, separate them according to the color of their eyes, treat one group badly and treat the other group very well, and see what would happen. Eye color and skin color are caused by the same chemical, melanin. There is no logic in judging people by the amount of chemical in their skin. Pigmentation should have nothing to do with how you treat another person, but unfortunately it does. Give me a child at the age of 8, let me do that exercise, and that child is changed forever.
Wow. So, friends, that's a little bit of an insight into the exercise that was performed many, many times over, but first originated in a classroom setting. We are here together with Jane Elliot, the mastermind of that exercise that, again, as mentioned, has since been replicated in adult settings across the United States. We are honored to host you, Jane, and with your permission, I'd like to ask a few questions. The first question is, where and when did this idea of this exercise originate? And what were you feeling or thinking that morning, way back in time, April 1968, just before you opened the classroom door?
I was during the Holocaust. I was thinking about what Adolf Hitler did. I was thinking about the fact that he separated people according to the color of their eyes. And that one of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber was eye color. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they threw you into the gas chamber because they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. I didn't invent this exercise. I learned it from an expert, a man who knew how to divide and conquer people, a man who knew how to pick out a group of people on the basis of either a religious or a physical characteristic and turn the entire society against those people because of that religion, because of that faith, or because of that physical characteristic. What I did was not my idea. I learned it from Adolf Hitler. And it came to me when I read books about the Holocaust. I'm a reader, I read a lot. And the kinds of things that I read are not romance novels. They are what happened then, what's happening now, and what's the connection. And because of that, 4 years ago, I recognized that we were going into yet another Hitlerian era in this country. And this is terrifying for me.
Jane, I want to go back in time, and then we're going to work our way forward. I wanted to ask you, how did the principal in your school, the superintendent, and the parents of the children react when you did this exercise?
Number one, nobody knew I was going to do it. And they didn't know I had done it until the kids went home from school and told their parents. And then we did the exercise on Friday with brown-eyed kids on the top. We repeated the exercise on Monday with blue-eyed kids on the top. On Tuesday, they wrote 4 paragraph compositions telling what had happened to them. Then we got in a magic circle and talked about what had happened. I showed those compositions to my mother. She showed them to the editor of the local paper. He printed those essays. Then a friend of mine in the community, got a copy of that and sent it to the Johnny Carson show, and that's when it exploded. It was never meant to get out of my classroom. This was strictly a classroom exercise for my 3rd graders. But once it was out there, there was no stopping it. There was no not having parents know. And at that point, when parents found out about it, the boys at the coffee shop in the morning said things like, "Why is she doing that exercise in Riceville? We don't have any racism in Riceville. We don't have any N-words." And that is so typical. If there are none of those different people here, of course we can't have any problems with them. But if we consider them problem making simply because of their difference, you have the problem without the people. The people aren't the problem. The problem is the problem. The problem is our ignorance about people who are different from ourselves.
And were the other teachers impressed or unimpressed by this very...
They were distressed. They were infuriated. They begged to have me fired. They did everything they could to keep me from succeeding from that moment on. And they never got over it until the day some of them died. Some of them died in the rest home. And when I'd go to the rest home to visit my sister, they looked like, here she is, the witch is back. Only they weren't thinking witch. They were thinking the B word, which for me is an acronym for being in total control, honey. Because I knew when I walked by them that I had turned into the B word and I was in total control. They were angry because if I was right, they were wrong. And when my 3rd graders went passed through the school, every year they confronted some teacher on their racist comments. And every year the teacher complained about it. And every year the administrator had to say, well, the child isn't wrong, but what you said is objectionable on all levels. So maybe you need to take that word out of your vocabulary. And that things like that happening to teachers make them very, very angry.
What effect did it have on your personal family life?
Well, my children were beaten and spit on. Their belongings were destroyed. They were physically and verbally abused and psychologically abused by their peers, by their teachers, and some of the parents of their peers. My parents lost their job. I lost all my friends. I realized then that they weren't my friends. They were just people that had to put up with me. It was an extremely interesting thing. I know how, who was that person who spread disease and nobody would have anything to do with her. Who am I talking about? Remember, it doesn't matter. But I walked through the halls of that school building every day and not one teacher would speak to me. And when I walked past little clots of teachers visiting outside their classrooms, they'd stop suddenly. So I'd think, well, I guess they don't want to hear what I'm saying. I guess I know who they're talking about. It was very, it would have been unpleasant had not my father said to me after I told him about it, keep on smiling. They'll wonder what the hell you've been up to. So I kept on smiling. And I think they wondered why I wasn't bothered. I didn't get bothered by it.
How many years of this type of, how many years did this go on for?
I started in 1968 and quit teaching in that system in 1985, and I quit teaching. I was not run out of teaching. I left the classroom because I was offered jobs working with major corporations doing the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise with their employees.
How many children would you say you trained over the decades?
I didn't train any children. I don't train people. You train military members, you train dogs, you train cats. I don't train children.
I'm sorry. How many children did you educate?
Be careful with your language when you talk to me, because I'm really picky.
Excellent.
I educated probably between about 25 kids a year and that when I was in third grade, and then went up to junior high. I got all the junior high kids at one time or another. And then so that was in I don't know when I went to junior high, probably, I don't remember what year, but it was a number of children and a number of adults.
Wow. Now, you know, one of the quotes from your book is so powerful. While you're describing the Thursday, you write, long before noon, I was sick. I wished I had never started it. During the morning recess, I went to the teacher's lounge and told 3 other teachers what I was doing. They laughed. I went back to my empty room and cried. And my question for you is, were you concerned about the effect the exercise might have on the children? How did you personally, right at the outset, have the knowledge, the intuition to go forward, recognizing that it would be constructive rather than destructive?
I trusted myself as an adult human being with a grain of common sense to know how not to damage and to know how to educate children. I knew how far to go with this. I knew better than to hurt a child with this, but I also knew better than to not do it in order to avoid making a child unhappy. We have a whole lot of people in this country who don't know any better than to behave the way they are. They think that people of color are of a different race. They think that because they've been taught that from day one. I
think she got disconnected.
Oh, okay. In the meantime, I'm going to show you some fascinating footage about what happens years later when she meets up with the class once again.
300 odd students who have by now been through it.
Okay, let's get in a circle.
The reunion of her former third graders was Jane Elliott's first chance to find out how much of her lessons her students had retained.
All right, now, Raymond, why? I want to know why you were so eager to discriminate against the rest of these kids. At the end of the day, I thought the miserable little Nazi. Really, I couldn't stand you.
It felt tremendously evil. All your inhibitions were gone. And no matter if they were my friends or not, any pent-up hostilities or aggressions that these kids had ever caused you, you had a chance to get it all out.
I felt like I was a king, like I ruled them brown eyes, like I was better than them. Happy.
You know?
And you did it all day.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you were the out group?
Boy, that day after we went home, I talk about hating somebody. It was there.
You hated me.
Yeah, of what you were putting us through. Nobody likes to be looked down upon. Nobody likes to be hated, teased, or discriminated against. And it just boggles up inside of you. You just get so mad.
Were you just angry, or was there more than that?
I felt demoralized, humiliated.
Is the learning worth the agony?
Yes. Yes.
It made everything a lot different than what it was. We was a lot better family altogether. Even at our houses, we was probably, because it was hard on you when you have your best friend one day and then he's your enemy the next. It brings it out real quick in you.
That is so powerful. And I highly, highly encourage everyone viewing today to make a point of watching that film. It was a documentary. There's a number of different titles. One is A Class Divided, based on the title of a book that was written by Jane Elliot together with someone. And there's another one, In the Eye of the Storm. Incredible, because to me, one of the most important findings of this exercise and this education is that those few hours within that classroom setting managed to change the trajectory of the lives of these eventual human beings, each one of whom at some point or another in their adult life stood up to discrimination, stood up against racism, many, many times at great personal cost. And I believe that is so instructive because those few hours in that setting had such a profound impact on them longer term. And I find that to be absolutely amazing. Jane, I have a question for you. You write in the book fascinating observations that struck me. First of all, the amount of time that it took for the kids to turn on each other. Would you care to elaborate for a moment on what that felt like?
5 minutes after I told those kids that part of them were superior and they had the right to regard the others as inferior, they became what I told them they were. And 5 minutes from that first 5 minutes on, they knew how. This is what made me sick inside. They knew how to discriminate. They knew how to be a racist.
Wow. And another thing that struck me was the amount of power that people in positions of authority have to shape the beliefs of children.
They knew how to discriminate on the basis of a physical children, but you have to remember that there's a child in every one of us. And you hit the button on that person and that child comes out, and that child is the one who then responds to what's going on. And that's exactly what this is happening in this country today.
Now, Jane, one other thing you spoke about so powerfully is that the children who were taught that they were superior ended up actually performing better in their studies. They actually viewed themselves as with better capabilities. And the children who were taught that they were inferior, they wilted and they imploded and their self-confidence was shot. Could you elaborate a bit on that effect it had on the children?
I had 4 boys in that first year that I did that. I had 4 boys who were dyslexic and will be as long as they live, but they couldn't read well, they couldn't spell well. On the day those boys were on the top in that exercise, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell. And at the end of the day, little brown-eyed Billy came up to my desk and said, "Mrs. Elliot, where's my spelling paper?" He said, "What do you want?" I said, "What do you want it for, Billy?" He said, "I want to show it to my mother. She thinks I can't spell," and I can. He found out because I told him my expectations were powerful, good expectations for those kids. They lived up to my expectations. The ones of whom I expected less lived down to my expectations. Now, if you can do that with a child in one day, think what you can do with that. You can do with a human being if you do that to them for a lifetime. We're doing.
Wow. You know, there's a quote from the book I'd like to read, Jane, where you write, I had not expected, you're now talking about, though, the second day, when they came back to school on Monday, you write, I had not expected that the brown-eyed children, knowing full well after their experience on Friday, that it was all an exercise and that it would last only a day, would react as intensely as the others had to the experience of discrimination. And then you write, but they did within minutes. They'd become nervous, depressed, resentful. The only real difference that day, and this is to me the most illuminating passage of the book. This affected me very much when I read it, and I never forgot it since, and I've used it in various presentations and sermons and talks. Here's the key passage, for me at least, among an incredible book, rich with detail and description and insight. And here's the point. The only real difference that day was that the blue-eyed children now on top were noticeably less vicious in their treatment of the underlings than the latter had been to them. And what I found so powerful about that is that very often we talk about anti-discrimination and anti-racism and so forth in the abstract or in the academic sense, but it's the experiential education that you brilliantly brought to life that has that impact and creates change. And that's, I think, a very insightful lesson I have personally learned in terms of any lesson in general, but specifically lessons like this, where they hit home through experience. And my question to you is if you could elaborate a little bit on what it was like to meet those students in their adult years, when they sat around that circle, what were some of the things they shared and how it impacted them into their adult life?
Oh, Sandy, I asked Sandy's husband what it was like to be married to somebody who had gone through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. He said, I'm glad I'm married somebody who had you for a teacher, because our children aren't being raised the way my nieces and nephews are. And tells the child why we don't say these things. He said, she's an absolutely brilliant thing for him to say, but it was brilliant because she remembered what happened to her. One of the really interesting things about that is the day the brown-eyed kids were on the top, the blue-eyed boys said in the boys' restroom that ugly things they were going to do to the brownies if boys ever got power. On the day the blue-eyed people were on top, the blue-eyed people were kinder to the brown-eyed kids than the brown-eyed kids had been to them. So after they had finished writing their exercise the third day on Tuesday, we got in the magic circle and I said to them, why didn't you blue-eyed kids get even with the brown-eyed kids? You said you were going to. I know that's what you said. And they all said, because we didn't want to make anybody feel the way we felt. We weren't going to treat them the way we were treated. We know how that feels. If we could just show that film to people and have them realize that that's what they learned and that's how they feel, maybe white people would be less fearful about what's going to happen to them in the future when brown-eyed people, brown-skinned people are the numerical majority in the United States of America. And that's what's going to happen in about 30 years. So see, we have to get over this now because we only have 30 years to clean this mess up.
Interesting. And another thing that it struck me when you were sharing is that really, in a sense, what you created in that classroom was not sympathy, but empathy. So, sympathy is feeling bad for someone else. Empathy is feeling bad with them. And unless a person internalizes the feelings of those who are marginalized and ostracized, they themselves will be unchanged to some degree. And what's incredible, Jane, about this is it reminds me of a Jewish commentary that teaches that the reason that the Israelite nation spent their early national infancy, if you will, in Egypt, persecuted and enslaved, was in order to develop in them that sensitivity and empathy towards the voiceless and the marginalized. And that's why we find that the Bible very often says, protect the stranger, protect the widow, protect the orphan, because you know what it's like to be the stranger and the outsider, the other, having spent time in that painful experience of discrimination and persecution. Jane,
but it also says in the Bible, insomuch as ye have done it unto one of these my brethren, so have ye done it unto me. So if we are doing these ugly things to other members of the human race, that is as if they were doing it to me, because every human being on the face of the earth is my 30th to 50th cousin. And when you abuse one of them, you are in fact abusing someone who is related to me, and I want it stopped.
Brilliant. Very, very true. And what you said is also very linked to the notion that we learn in scripture about every human being having been created in the divine image. And therefore their value doesn't come from their externals, doesn't come from something that is other than their intrinsic, infinite, unconditional, irrevocable status as a child of God. And we all are children of God. And therefore, when you harm, as you said, another child of someone, you're harming the parent. And so by compromising another human being's dignity, God forbid, it's not just we're affronting their divine image, we're affronting them and their humanity and also God, as it were.
But we don't have to believe in God to believe in treating people fairly.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things we forget. We think that if you aren't a Christian or you aren't Jewish or you aren't Muslim or you aren't Buddhist or you aren't one of these religions, then you can't possibly be a child of God. Well, it says in the Bible, we are all members of the family of man. And that means we are all members of the human race and we all deserve equitable treatment under the law. And this, I'm really upset about what we learn in schools, in synagogues, in mosques, and in classrooms, because each of us is pushing his or her own issue instead of pushing humanness.
Jane, I couldn't agree more with you. I believe that is the fundamental teaching, that we are all united and all part of, we trace our roots back, as you put it so eloquently, to what Adam and Eve, if you take a religious narrative, but otherwise to the human race, as you put it. And regardless of one's beliefs or otherwise, as I said before, this is something that is intrinsic, a value that is unconditional. With your permission, I want to share just a few minutes of something that blew my mind, because you didn't just leave this exercise in the classroom, you didn't just educate children, but you were invited then to educate adults who are in positions of power and could potentially abuse that power, be it the police force or the prisons, prison wardens, and the following clip, I believe, is mind-blowing and actually demonstrates I'm going to give you an amazing compliment, Jane. What you said before about how you knew the lines, where to push, when to pull back, and if that's important with anyone, it's important with children, and as you'll see in the clip, you do it brilliantly when it comes to adults as well. So I'm going to share a few minutes with your permission from this segment.
Anglo-Saxon, yet even here, minority groups account for more than 20% of the population. To make sure its prison system employees are sensitive to the concerns of this large minority, the Iowa Department of Corrections last fall hired Jane Elliot to give her lesson to some of them. The group, included prison guards and parole officers, was told only that it would be attending a day-long workshop. David Stokesbury.
Most of our training you go to, people give you information and you learn that way. Blue Eye? When I first came with the sign up and such and got put in the group, I didn't know when I started seeing the signs around, brown eyes only and such, I figured they were the better group because they had a lot of spaces available and there were none for the blue eyes. So when I got put in the blue eyes group and put the collar on, then I knew, well, then I was going to be in the deprived group, I guess.
Okay, now you can stay in this area.
The workshop was supposed to begin at 9. They took the brown eyes in about 9 and then left us standing in the hall. I literally stood because there weren't enough chairs and I didn't know whether or not I'd want to fight to take a chair down. I didn't know if somebody would come and take the chair away from me if I did.
While David Stokesbury and the other blue-eyed people waited inside the meeting room, Jane Elliot prepared the brown-eyed people for what was going to happen.
Now, this is not something I can do alone. This exercise won't work without your cooperation. Blue-eyed people aren't allowed to smoke. Blue-eyed people aren't allowed to sit in these empty chairs. Do not let a blue-eyed person sit next to you. You know you can't trust them. And besides which, they don't smell good. Everybody knows that about blue-eyed people. You don't know what you can catch from a blue-eyed person.
by 9:20, I felt some antagonism. I'm stuck out here for 20 minutes, standing, waiting.
I still say we ought to see what kind of reaction we'd get by everyone just simply going in. No one wants to do it?
Everybody seems to have courage in their conviction to do a lot of talking, but nobody said yes. Oppose it by all singing a song and doing something really loud, you know.
We shall overcome.
Yeah, right.
I need to have you keep it down. I don't know how many times I need to give that instruction, but you need to keep it down so you don't bother the people in the workshop.
I was pretty well ticked off by the time we got taken in there.
Well, first, and then over goes to the corner of your belt. I need to have you put your purse in your coat in the corner. Purse and coat in the corner. Purses and always coat in the corner.
It would be to your advantage in the future, people, if you'd get to meetings on time. And it would also be to your advantage if you'd put your gum away. Put your gum away. You want to get paid for today? Well, then stay, but put your gum away.
I don't have a purse, so I have to put my gum.
I'm sure that you are inventive enough to find a place for the gum. Now, I'd like for you to notice where she put her gum. You have this problem with blue-eyed people. You give them something decent and they just wreck it. You'll also notice that blue-eyed people spend a lot of time playing look at me. See how cute I am. I can be funny. I can make a joke of this. This is amusing. I'm amused by this. Another thing that is obvious about blue-eyed people is that they're poor listeners. The first thing you have to do when you're teaching in a segregated situation, when you're working in a segregated situation, is teach the listening skills. The listening skills are: number one, good listeners have quiet hands, feet, and mouths. Everyone needs to write these down. I'd like for you to look at the man in the back, in the black jacket. The game we're playing is playing it cool. This is a favorite blue-eyed game, playing it cool. Nobody can bother me, man. I can handle this. I don't have to do this. I'm going to ignore this whole thing. Number two, good listeners keep their eyes on the person who is speaking. I take it you don't have a pencil. Nor you? Perhaps you could borrow one from one of your neighbors. Sir, I realize that you feel that you don't need to write it down, but whether or not you write it down, perhaps you could remember it. Good listeners have quiet hands, feet, and mouths. Do you know what that means?
I'm not sure.
I believe that. Do you want me to explain it to you?
That's okay. I'll get a pencil and write this down directly.
Look, blue-eyed people, many of you have pencils. Will one of you please lend him a pencil, or don't you trust him? Which I can understand. From the last 10 minutes, what have you observed about blue-eyed people?
Blue-eyed people are very stubborn, very self-centered, and wish to control as much of their surrounding as possible. People-wise, I mean. Very inconsiderate people. I don't even know why you have them here in the first place.
We have them here because we are required to have them here.
We have to.
This is one of the things you have to put up with. Number three, good listeners, listen from the beginning to the very end. Okay, good listeners decide to learn something. And this is the thing you'll have the most difficulty with blue-eyed people. They decide not to learn something. Some of you have had trouble with blue-eyed people in your home environments. Some of you have had trouble with blue-eyed people in your workplace. Does anybody have an example of that they'd like to talk about? Anyone?
I have two nephews, and one's blue-eyed and one's brown-eyed. And the blue-eyed one, he never cleans his room and he's real lazy. And the brown, he doesn't seem to have a lot of energy. The blue.
No, you trained them very well.
So what we're going to see now is another 2 minutes of how they reacted once Jane revealed to them that it was just an exercise.
What sexism amounts to, and how much you contribute to the sexism that keeps you where you are. It's not enough.
Where I am, lady. Yeah, good night.
Yes.
I'm getting kind of fed up with this whole bunch of garbage.
Why?
Brown-eyed peoples are no different than we are. I hate to tell them that. They have these false delusions and such.
Are they being disruptive?
No, you trained them very well.
I think that's what they did with the stormtroopers in Germany also. You guys do a real good job sitting
You
out
think that what's
there.
happening here today feels like it would have felt in Nazi Germany?
Yes,
Where do you think you are in that then?
where do I think I am?
Who are you if you're in Nazi Germany? Who are you?
The Jews.
After a break for lunch, Jane Elliot helped the corrections department employees analyze what had happened.
Did you learn anything this morning?
I think I learned from the experience of feeling like I was in a glass cage, that I was powerless. There was a sense of hopelessness. I was angry, I wanted to speak up, and yet at times I knew if I spoke up, I'd be back in a powerless situation. I'd be attacked. A sense of hopelessness.
Had you experienced that before?
I realized this morning that there were very few times in my life that I've ever been discriminated against. Very few.
And you were this uncomfortable in an hour and a half?
I was amazed at how uncomfortable I was in the first 15 minutes.
Can you empathize at all then with blacks, minority group members in this country?
I'm hoping better than before.
We tried to argue with you. You would use just the mere argument as reason for us being lesser than the brown-eyed folks. You know, you couldn't win.
Yeah, don't we do that every day?
I think some do, yeah. But I would hope that I never get so unreasonable. You know, the statements you were making were groundless and such, and yet we couldn't argue with them because if we argued, then we were argumentative and you know, not listening and getting out of our place and all that stuff. And that was frustrating to me. And then frustrating to me was the other little green tags who were sitting on their hands. My group here was, I didn't think boisterous enough in our opposition to the whole thing.
Why didn't you people support one another? Why didn't the blue-eyed people on this side just sat there? And let's face it, you covered your asses, right? Why did you just sit there?
Well, I think that's symptomatic of the problem as a whole. We see that, you know, in society in general, we see a few people who are making a lot of noise, and the rest of the people sitting back waiting to see what they're going to do.
Okay, as long as I was picking on him, I was leaving you alone, right?
Right.
I'd say a lot of people accept that. They have a few people do their fighting for them, and they stand back, and if this person's going to win, then they'll get on this side. If that person's not going to win, they'll stay back over here, you know. That's it.
Utterly fascinating, Jane. And I think that, at least for me, this is real. This is not scripted, if I understand correctly. This is real reality television in the sense that it's happening in real time. And my question to you is, when you walked into that environment, were you concerned that or afraid for how things would go? I mean, it's such a delicate balance. I'm watching it and I'm feeling so awkward. And so, you know, the tension in the air. What was it like for you to walk into those rooms time and again and do those exercises?
Because I'm a white female and I know exactly how to discriminate against people. I know how to turn people against one another. I know how to use physical characteristics to decide whether people are good or bad. And every person in that room sees that happening because they know that that's happening outside that room every day, and they become themselves. The painful part of this exercise is you watch people become themselves. They act what they are. When you put people in a tension situation and keep them there with no hope for getting out, they act out. They begin, if we'd done it too long, then they would begin, and I've had people throw fits, and one man went into an anxiety attack, and we had to haul him on his chair out of the room because he couldn't take it, because this is not what white people are used to having to put up with. You watch the black people, and they just acted like, how do you like it now? And there was one black woman there who turned around. There's one black woman there who said, young, gorgeous black woman who said, I'm black, and I didn't tell anyone until 2 years ago. I decided I was going to come out and tell people what I was. And the mouthy woman behind her reached up and said, I didn't know you were black. And this young black woman turned around and said, what would you have done if you had known? And this woman went, as if it wouldn't have mattered. It did matter. It mattered greatly. That woman exposed herself, the woman behind her, the noisy one. If you watch the whole thing, you'll see that she wants so badly to take control. She'll do anything to get attention. She's the one that I said, you're playing look at me. She did it during the debriefing. It was ridiculous, the things that she said. And if you read the book, A Collar in My Pocket, and then you read what she said during that meeting, everything that she said is being said this week by white people who are upset by these protests. What she said then, I am hearing now.
Wow.
It doesn't change.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, how many of these groups did you speak to over the years? Adults. To me, the major revelation is that these are adults, and in under an hour, they literally buy into the narratives that are provided by the person of authority. How many groups did you talk to and educate over the years?
Oh my goodness, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many over the years, but I worked for US West Direct, and Public Service of Colorado for 3 or 4 years, and I did 3 of those groups a week.
Wow.
3 a week for those years. And every time I got the same responses out of every group.
Wow.
White people go crazy when they are treated for a few hours or a few minutes the way we treat people of color in this country for a lifetime. Males go crazy. It's a male that hit me, because you cannot tell a white male that he's inferior without him acting out. It's just been absolutely amazing, the things we've learned from watching the way adult people behave when they are treated unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they have no control. And yet, we expect Black people not only to take it, but not to react. And if they do react, we'll say to them, why don't you go back? If you don't like it here, why don't you go back where you came from? And it never occurs to us that if we did the same thing to us that we are doing to them, we split us into us and them instead of considering us all of us. We should all just be us.
And I love your line that there's only one race, the human race, which is quite powerful. And, Jane, I'm conscious of your time. And I want to just ask you on a practical level. First of all, I want to recommend, you have a website and there's a bibliography there. There's some books to read and so forth. Jane, when we spoke the other day, you shared with me the power of becoming educated. That's what we can do. That's the first step. So I want to ask you to elaborate for a few moments on different books that have educated you and what you would recommend to us.
Oh, if you read When at Times the Mob is Swayed, you will realize why what is happening now looks like Hitler, because it is. If you read Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, you will realize how brilliant those Black people were when they were able to leave Africa and populate land masses all over the earth. You will realize how ridiculously we have cheapened ourselves and have denied ourselves fantastic ability and intelligence and capability in members of other color groups, not races, but color groups. If you would read Andrew Hacker's book, Two Nations, Black, White, Separate, and Unequal, you've got to read it.
Fantastic. So all of these books, Jane, all of them are on the website?
No, the last 3 I said aren't on the website because I've only read them in the last month or so. So you have to read When at Times the Mob is Swayed. You have to read Robert Wald Sussman's The Myth of Race. You have to read that. Everybody has to read that, because then you know how this started and why it is perpetuated. It's a moneymaker. Racism is a moneymaker. Make no mistake about that. The people who are running this show know that you can make more money if you can sell unacceptable property and homes to people of color. And then when you need that space for second-class people, you can wipe all of those people out of there, buy that land up, and call it regentrification, which is a nice name for throwing out those who were there first, who had to be there because they couldn't afford better housing, and selling that land to people who can afford better housing, which means throw out the Black people, throw out the brown people, let the white people have this good housing and the good land. If you didn't, you have to realize that racism pays.
Right. Okay. So Jane.
Go on.
Jane, I'm sorry, the connection is lagging. Jane. So the name of your website is Jane. I think it's JaneElliot.com.
Yes. Jane at JaneElliot.com. Yes.
Okay, so, oh, by the way, friends, over there you can see some of her talks, some of the books to read, very important information. Again, because of the time, I don't want to let you go, Jane. I would like to conclude with a video of Jane, such a powerful clip. And after that, I'm going to thank you dearly, but just give me a moment to share this final clip for everybody. And once again, A Class Divided is the book. In the Eye of the Storm and A Class Divided are the documentaries as well that you can benefit from watching.
But they need to read my book, A Collar in My Pocket.
A Collar in My Pocket, is that based on the exercise? Okay.
That's based on everything it's based on everything I've learned over the last 52 years doing this exercise.
Okay, very good. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to receive more, maybe more titles from you, Jane, and I'll spread it around. I'll share it with everybody.
Why do we hate?
We hate because we're taught to hate. We hate because we're ignorant. We are the product of ignorant people who have been taught an ignorant thing, which is that there are 4 or 5 different races. There are not 4 or 5 different races. There's only one race on the face of the earth, and we're all members of that race, the human race. But we have separated people into races so that some of us can see ourselves as superior to the others. We thought it would work, I guess. It hasn't worked. It has been bad for everyone. It's time to get over this business. There is no gene for racism. There's no gene for bigotry. You're not born a bigot. You have to learn to be a bigot. Anything you learn, you can unlearn. It's time to unlearn our bigotry. It's time to get over this thing, and we best get over it pretty soon. I'm an educator, and it's my business as an educator to lead people out of ignorance. The ignorance of thinking that you're better or worse than someone else because of the amount of a pigment in your skin. Pigmentation in your skin has nothing to do with intelligence or with your worth as a human being. It's time to get over that.
So, Jane, let me conclude by first and foremost thanking you for the time and the energy and your message. I'm definitely speak for myself, but also I am fairly certain speaking for everyone who attended tonight. Let me conclude by giving you, Jane, a blessing for good health, for you and yours, a blessing for prosperity and for peace of mind, but more importantly, to take all of that and continue to illuminate and teach and educate millions upon millions of individuals, each of whom represent an entire world. And hopefully, step by step, slowly but surely, in fact, hopefully quickly, but most importantly, surely we will reach that time when all of humanity will celebrate one another, will empathize with one another, and will feel united as one group, as one race, as one family of mankind. Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much for your time. God bless you, and God bless America.
God bless the United States of America.
Perfect. God bless the United States of America. E pluribus unum, out of the many, may we see one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.